Well, welcome to New Frontier News. I am your host, Angelo Rodriguez, and we are joined here today by Stephen Kosmicki, the sole proprietor at a private practice and he is a psychotherapist. Did I say that correct, Stephen? Please correct me.
Yes, you did. Thanks, Angelo. It's great to be here.
Likewise, thank you for joining us. I'm glad you are here. Can you briefly tell our audience just a little bit about yourself and how you got into psychotherapy?
Yeah, sure. I am originally from Colorado. I moved to New York City probably I think it's about 25 years ago, and never looked back. Um, I did not start my life, I didn't start my adult working life as a therapist. I actually studied international affairs and psychology in college, and I did have a real interest in psychology. And actually, I worked on a volunteer crisis hotline called Rapline at the University of Colorado, and it was like a hotline for people in crisis. And but I was not ready to pick a career. I was restless and I wanted life experience. So I spent the next 15, 20 years kind of kicking around at different jobs. I did just about every job, from being a taxi driver, bike messenger. I was a real estate broker. I sold product placement in film and TV. Um, Among many others. I eventually, though, I came back to my interest in psychology, human behavior, and also social justice. So I was waiting tables at a restaurant, and I was also still dabbling in a career as an actor. And I decided to start experimenting with my interest in working in psychology again. So I started working for Covenant House as a resource center to try to help teens from becoming homeless. And then I moved into a vocational training school for young adults who were looking to complete their GED and get job training. And then I shifted into working with older adults at one of the only older adult shelters in New York City. And during that time, I went back to school and got my master's in social work at Hunter College School of Social Work. Um, and that led me into working. I continued to work at the shelter, and then I became the clinical director and later the program director at a social service agency. I was at a residence for mentally ill adults. And as I was doing that, I was getting more and more interested in psychology and more interested in clinical psychology. So I became much more interested in doing therapy. And so then I started private practice while I was still working the social service field. And as part of that, I started doing institute training, and I'm just finishing up a certificate in psychoanalytic training. And that's it. And so through the pandemic, I actually stepped out of the social services field and moved into full-time private practice.
Oh, wow. Well, Stephen, you sound like you have a history. You have a wide, very wide, varied background, which gives you a lot of experience. You've dealt with a lot of people throughout your life, it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
So, how important is it? I mean, especially through this pandemic, that's partly why I wanted to talk to you. How important is it that people seek someone to talk to? Like, how important is it? How important is this mental health aspect that we're talking about?
I think I think at least, especially recently, people are finding uh, people come to therapy for various reasons. Many people come because of current life stressors. They often come because there are long-standing issues that they've maybe dealt with okay, but then when you have major stressors happen, like um, national crisis like the pandemic, or the political crises that have happened, all of the major issues that we're being faced with, from racism to violence against Asian Americans, all of these factors put a lot of pressure on people. And we find in the field that it typically helps people to talk. I'm not going to purport to be the expert on how therapy works. There are whole books written about that, and there is a difference of opinion about how it works. But I can only speak from my experience to know, and in my training, that uh, secrets can be really toxic, and keeping things
Mm.
to yourself can be really toxic. And a lot of people that I talk to will often refer to bottling things up, or keeping things to themselves, or not being able to talk about it, or it's not acceptable to say that in my family, or um, I'm worried what this will do to other people. And all of these phrases are usually attached to kind of a negative connotation. This is something that doesn't feel good. What does feel good is to be able to talk about it. And what I hear people typically say is that, now that I'm saying this out loud, which leads to another aspect of it, I think, is that as we talk out loud, it makes it real, and it also helps us understand that how we're thinking. I knew somebody in the theater world that said, our thinking process is only as complex as our language process.
Mm.
Or more importantly, we're only as complex, our thoughts are only as complex as our language is. So for us to be able to put into words what's happening for us inside, to talk about our internal experience outside, can be especially healing. And I think one of the biggest aspects of that is that people in my field are actually bearing witness to how people are thinking and feeling, because there's a reason people don't say what is on their mind completely. And there's a reason that people don't say how they feel. Um, Often the reasons are judgment, feeling of embarrassment or shame, a history of being criticized, ridiculed for what they think and feel, um, what they think and feel is inconvenient or unacceptable for others, or others are not in a place where they can accept and understand and listen to them. So, for many people, being able to talk about what they're actually thinking and feeling is a new experience. And often people express that it's extremely helpful. Um, and last thing about that, I think one of the things that people really come to therapy for in many ways is to understand, to get a better sense of who they are, to get a better sense of self. And I don't think you can really know yourself until you know how you're feeling. So learning how we feel and think, it helps us start to understand who we are, what we're all about, what makes us tick, what's important to us, what we value, what we want, what we think is important, what we prioritize. That's my short answer.
No, it's very deep, and you're right. I think judgment is what holds most people back. I think that's that fear of being judged is very real in everyone's life. Even the most stout person that says, "No, I don't care what anyone thinks," they might care what their mother thinks. Or there's someone in their life they care about what they think, or even if they think something on themselves. I don't know. Judgment is huge. So isn't that what friends are for, Stephen? I mean, don't some people say, hey, look, I have friends, I get to call my friends and give them all my problems? Is that the way to go? Is it just people need more friends, or what's the difference there?
Yeah, I think friendship is extremely important. We're social animals. Before the tape, Angelo and I were talking about the how damaging solitary confinement is, and how, in many ways, many people have felt confined during the pandemic. And it almost mimics like being in jail. I've heard some people say, like, they felt like in lockdown in New York City, they felt like they were in jail. Um, and it's very isolating, and it's not natural. We're social animals. We're wired to connect. Now, not everybody feels that way, but in many ways, I think most of us need social interaction. And it's extremely important to have friends, and to have people that you can enjoy yourself, be yourself with. More and more studies, longitudinal studies of age, have shown that people tend to live longer with a wider array of friends, with more, the wider array of network of friends. However, a friendship and a conversation with a friend is very different from a conversation with a therapist. And again, I can speak specifically only to the way that I work, and I'm trained more psychoanalytically, in the sense that I'm trained to listen in a particular way. And that means I'm listening for all aspects of a person's makeup. I'm listening for developmental issues. I'm listening for um, personality structure, defensive structure. I'm listening for their wishes, for their fantasies, for their dreams. And all of these come out in various ways, and mostly consciously. But the unconscious mind, I think, is also very powerful. And often we speak about things without really knowing what it means to us. And so talking to somebody else can really help. And also, um, I think in many ways, it takes two people to be able to handle and think through very difficult thoughts. And there are times at which, you know, it's really hard. Um, and again, as a therapist, I'm trained to listen, and to listen in a particular way. And a lot of what I do as a therapist is what I don't say. So things that I might say to a friend or say to somebody, I'm not going to say to somebody who I'm seeing as a patient, because I'm using my understanding of my theoretical viewpoint, and also developmental issues and all of that, which I can say more simply, just to be, uh, you know, just to say that maybe, people are not necessarily ready to address things. We all have defensive structures. We all get defensive. We all are in denial. We all act, dismiss things, push them away. We get angry when we're actually hurt. We have all ways of getting defensive, but they're called defenses for a reason. And for me, the reason is defending against something. And it could be defending against feelings of terror, feelings of anxiety, feelings of inferiority, feelings of depression, anxiety. These defenses protect us. So we can't just dismantle them, rip them down. We have to take our time. And that just leads into the way that I work, which is really collaborative. So I work with people in a collaborative process, and kind of understand that everybody needs their own treatment. And a lot of my job is to figure out what that treatment needs to look like. And that's where my training and my expertise come in. But when it comes to being an expert on the person that I'm seeing, I look to the person who I'm seeing for that, the patient, to tell me about that. And then that's how we work. And again, this is just one perspective. This is how I see it. And this is, it's part of the picture. If I could tell you, if I could explain it all to you, then you wouldn't have to go to therapy.
No, yeah, there's a lot of things I'm sure you have to untangle. It takes a lot to get to know someone. How hard is it to get someone's trust? I can imagine that some people don't go to therapy because they fear being judged by the therapist. they're like, oh, this guy's gonna just think I'm nuts. I can't go to him and tell him what I really think. Like I think, or is that an issue? I don't know. I
Yeah. Well, it actually speaks to the history of psychotherapy, which goes back to Freud's time. And Freud's golden rule was to say everything. And so his idea was the talking cure was people would sit down, lay down on the couch, and they would say everything that was on their mind. But what they started to learn was, as he was developing his theory, was that people were not saying everything that was on their mind. And what prevented them was what we might call resistance, what some people might call defenses, and some people might just simply call in regular language, in lay language, feeling guarded, feeling weird, feeling cautious, etc. And it is a lot to ask, and it's a peculiar relationship. When I first start with somebody who's never been in psychotherapy, I often need to help them understand how it works. There's kind of a culture of it, about the way that it works.
Hmm.
And um, and then that's my job, is to help people to be able to talk and to be able to trust, but it needs to be in their time. And for me to engage with somebody, first, we have to take the time to develop a trusting relationship that feels safe and in which they can start to say what they need to say, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. And I think, there is a culture to therapy. I remember watching Sopranos, and I remember the therapist, they showed the clear distinction between her family, who had a culture of therapy. They were able to talk through their problems, and Tony's family, who had no therapy culture, and they would just fight and just, he would, kill people. But, um,
Uh,
but you mentioned that, and I want to ask, do you find that that's an issue? Because I know, hey, culturally, there's different cultures that, they have certain norms and things, the way men should be, the way women should be, and or that therapy is, you don't talk, you're supposed to hold in your feelings, and there's certain cultures that hold these values strong.
hmm.
How do you reach those people? Like,
Yeah.
how do you reach those cultures? And should
Yeah.
you? I mean, how do they get to you?
I realized I like the way you heard that. And I think the way you heard that, the culture of therapy, was kind of how cultures are kind of therapeutic and how it's different, like for the Sopranos, and also like for the therapist. And that's one thing that I'll speak to in a second. But I think my language probably wasn't as helpful. When I say the culture of therapy, I mean there's a whole thing about how therapy works, right? You contact a therapist, you walk in, you sit down, and then you say what's on your mind. And there's a way that you need, and part of the culture of therapy is, typically we'll see somebody once a week, every week, and you pay at the end of the session, and you keep your appointments, and you say whatever you need to say, or sometimes it's what's pressing. But that's what I meant by the culture of therapy. It's like understanding just how does it work. That's really the answer to the question. People go, how does this work? And then I help. That's my job as a therapist. But going back to, I think what you're saying is that different cultures have different attitudes about therapy.
Correct.
That
Yeah.
some cultures are really like, yeah, it's like, I've heard this before. It's like, why do I need a therapist? That's what I have friends for. I don't need a therapist. Or um, yeah, why do I have to talk about my feelings? Who wants to talk about feelings? So if somebody's come to me, uh, if somebody's come into my office, or engaged me, and we're doing a video session, that tells me there's some interest there. And usually people come to therapy with mixed feelings. There's usually ambivalence there. And, for good reason. It's not easy to do therapy. It feels uncomfortable at times, it's challenging at times, it can bring up feelings that are difficult to feel. but it also, in my belief, can pay major dividends in the sense of helping people feel more free, helping people feel uh, more alive, more themselves, be able to feel. And most people experience improvements in other aspects of their lives. But what do we do? So if somebody walks into my office, I'm assuming that there's part of them that is interested and bought in. And so then what I do is I just will work with, as I see that they may have trouble, we'll talk about it. But the other thing to acknowledge is talk therapy is not for everybody. Not everybody wants to do talk therapy. And I think there are many cases that you could make that it might not be the best, or certainly not just talk therapy. There might be other modalities that might help people. Um, but yeah, there are different attitudes about psychotherapy, and remember, it's this is a field that started. Some would argue started the end of the, let's see, the 1800s, the end of the 19th century. And the thing about psychotherapy is it's still evolving. It's always evolving. And I mentioned Freud, but there are a few people that, and there are some people that still do this, but it's few people that sort of see the therapist as the person who sits there and listens to all the patients' problems and difficulties and tells them what the issues are, or tells them what the problem is, and then they feel better. Now it's really mostly two people in a room working on issues and dealing with everything that comes up between them, as well as what the underlying issues are. Um, but as far as cultural attitudes towards therapy, I get concerned when that's a barrier for people getting the help that they need. Because as we've seen with the pandemic, it's really ravaged the country as far as people's mental health. I mean, what's happened in the pandemic is unprecedented, that it has basically taken away people's lifestyles. We have lost so much, including lifestyles. I mean, just one example, there's the articles in the news cycles reflect this. Recently, there was one that said grandparents lost a year.
Wow.
So grandparents that had like 6-month-old or 1-year-old grandchildren didn't get to see them live. They did a lot of Zooming, but it's not the same. Um, but there's so many ways that it's impacted us, and many of us have understood like the importance of just, I live in New York, so for me it's like going down to the deli or going to the coffee shop or being in the store and just having those little interactions with people, those favorite stores in New York. If you're not a New Yorker, we get in our neighborhoods and we kind of stay in our neighborhoods, and we kind of make connections and find community there. And when you lose that, you understand how important it is. And it's a surprise. I think it was a surprise to some of us, but there was so much that was lost. And although we've made do with the video, everybody I know is just so craving being in vivo, live with people, breathing the same air. Unfortunately, in this crazy time with this unprecedented illness, breathing the same air has been dangerous. And we're social animals. That is very, um, very impactful. I don't even have the words for it. I mean, what an impact that being close to somebody is dangerous. I mean, this is something, just think on that for a minute. So as we come back into person to person, I'm hearing from people a real sense of anxiety about doing that. And we're very adaptable. People have adapted to this life living at home, living inside for like a year, but now we have to transition out, and this presents its own anxieties. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I have this tendency when you ask me one question, I'll answer like three. So you have to just.
No, it's all right, man. I mean, go ahead, talk. That's what you're here for. I would want to know what you're thinking and know more about it. Get in depth into the question. Thank you for answering. And I know you got to go, but I just want to get a quick take on you, a quick take on the business of psychotherapy. I know you're in private practice. Do you have any advice or any tips, any things you'd like to share about the business of being a psychotherapist? How's it been for you?
Hmm. Well, I was lucky in that I started my practice while training at a psychoanalytic institute, and they were focused on a private practice model. So I started seeing treatment patients through the center where I'm studying, and so this gave me a group of people to start with already. And then I was kind of trained about the culture of therapy, how it works, setting a fee, determining how often to see people, booking an office space. You've got to get malpractice liability insurance, um, you know, uh, and then there's advertising and marketing. I, like many therapists, especially in the city, I have a profile on Psychology Today. I'm also listed on ZocDoc. Um, I take some insurance, and that's a question that therapists have to ask themselves: how whether they're going to be on panels or not. There are pluses and minuses. Um, and how do you set your fees? So my recommendation for most people starting out would be to absolutely get a supervisor. Find a supervisor, and as far as how to do that, if you're looking to start as a therapist, you've already had some connection with some place that you were training, or maybe a school that you went to, and often through those you can find a supervisor. So most people, when they start out, have a supervisor anyway, but it really does, you need support as a therapist. You need support from people who are helping supervise you and helping you understand and do your work, but also helping you build a practice. And many supervisors focus on that. That's part of their work as a supervisor. They'll help you with your work, but they'll also help you build a practice. Um, and I really believe in the kind of, I don't know if it's called this, but the old kind of craft method where you almost like apprentice in a way. And that's with, in the training that I did, I worked with people who have been in practice for 20, 30 years, and learned how to do what I do through them. So I guess the biggest piece of advice would be to seek supervision and get as much support, and then get more training and continue to get more training, and you meet more people and you get referrals from other therapists. Most of my referrals come from other therapists, and I refer to other people as well. And that's how you build your network. And then as you improve your work, then you develop a reputation and people know about you, um, and then they send patients your way. But it's a process.
All right. Well, thank you for the advice, Stephen. I appreciate it. I would love to have you come back and we can talk more about mental health. If someone is looking to, contact you, how can they reach you?
Um, so you could just find me on Psychology Today, and my name is Stephen. It's spelled Stephen, and the last name is Kosmicki, and and you can just plug that in, Psychology Today in New York City. Um, it's funny to be speaking how you spell my name live, because we're always so used to like texting it. Text it to me, or can you email it to me, or I'll put it in the chat box.
Well, don't worry.
So
We'll put links.
I remember what it was like. I remember what it was like without. I'm old enough to know what it was like without the internet and before we had cell phones. So
You had a notepad. You had a good notepad,
That's right.
and you wrote in
Yeah, I could write
script.
it. I could write on a notepad and put it on the screen, but I think you'll probably have. You can put it somewhere on the channel.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll put all the links for you. And thank you again so much, Stephen, for joining us today and, giving us advice and the take on mental health. Um, Thank you for joining us.
Angela, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a good day. We'll
All
talk.
right, you too.
Have a good one. All right. Bye.
Bye now.